The cold iron of the Colt revolver pressed against Hayden Lockwood's temple felt like nothing more than a mild inconvenience as he stared down his would-be killer. The year was 1878, and death had long been an old friend to the notorious gunslinger they called Stoneheart. "I reckon you best pull that trigger if you're aiming to use it," Hayden drawled, his voice carrying across the dusty saloon. His ice-blue eyes never blinked, never wavered. "Else put it away before I take offense." The young outlaw's hand trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down into his patchy beard. He couldn't have been more than 22, but desperation had aged him prematurely. The room had fallen silent, the piano player's fingers frozen mid-chord. They said you killed my brother in Tombstone," the young man stammered. Hayden didn't flinch. "I've killed a lot of men in Tombstone." What happened next unfolded in the span of a heartbeat. The outlaw's finger twitched on the trigger, but Hayden was faster. With a swift movement that belied his 35 years, he knocked the gun aside, drew his own revolver, and had it pressed against the younger man's chest before anyone could blink. "Your brother? What was his name?" Hayden asked, his voice eerily calm. Jesse Rawlins." Recognition flickered in Hayden's eyes. "The bank robbery. 3 innocent people dead, including a pregnant woman." His grip tightened. "Your brother wasn't worth the bullet I put in him, boy." The saloon held its collective breath. Everyone knew Hayden Lockwood's reputation. 7 years as the deadliest gun for hire in the Arizona Territory had earned him a fearsome name. They said he'd lost his heart in the war, that the Confederate soldier who went to battle never truly returned. But instead of pulling the trigger, Hayden stepped back. "Get out of my sight, and if I ever see you reaching for iron around me again, you'll join your brother." The young outlaw stumbled backward, knocking over a chair in his haste to escape. The doors of the Broken Spur saloon swung wildly behind him. "Damn, Lockwood," the bartender said, sliding a whiskey down the counter. "That's the 3rd fool this month looking to make a name off your hide." Hayden holstered his weapon and took the drink. "Won't be the last." He downed the amber liquid in one swallow, feeling nothing as it burned down his throat. "Maybe you ought to consider a different line of work," the bartender suggested. "Man of your skills could do well in more peaceful pursuits." Hayden's laugh was hollow. "What peaceful pursuits would you suggest for a man like me, Tom?" Before the bartender could answer, the Batwing doors swung open again. This time, it wasn't an outlaw looking for revenge, but Sheriff Lancaster, his weathered face grim beneath his gray mustache. "Lockwood, need a word." Hayden nodded to the bartender for another whiskey. "Whatever it is, I didn't do it." "It's not about what you did." Lancaster removed his hat, revealing thinning hair. "It's about what you might do. Got a proposition for you." Intrigued despite himself, Hayden gestured to the empty chair across from him. The sheriff sat down heavily, wincing at the pain in his arthritic knees. "Got a situation brewing outside of town. Homestead, belonging to a young widow named Violet Lawson." The sheriff leaned forward. "Vandermeer wants her land for the water rights. She's refused to sell." Hayden's expression remained impassive. "And this concerns me how? Vandermeer's hired guns, been terrorizing her, trying to scare her off. Last night they shot her foreman. He'll live, but he won't be much use to her for a while." "There are laws against such things," Hayden commented dryly. "That's what you wear that star for." Lancaster's face reddened. "Don't you think I know that? But I can't be everywhere at once, and Vandermeer's got 3 of his men watching her place. I need someone who can stay out there, keep an eye on things until I can gather enough evidence to move against Vandermeer legally." "You're asking me to play nursemaid to a widow?" Hayden raised an eyebrow. "I'm not exactly known for my gentle demeanor, Sheriff. I'm asking you to do what you do best, intimidate men who need intimidating." Lancaster leaned closer. "She's got a 6-year-old boy, Lockwood, and she's alone out there." Hayden stared into his empty glass. "What makes you think I care?" "Because despite what people say about you, I remember the man you were before the war, before Gettysburg." Lancaster's voice dropped. "That man's still in there somewhere." Hayden's jaw tightened. "That man died a long time ago." "Then prove it." Lancaster stood up. "Prove you're as heartless as they say. Turn your back on a woman and child who need help." Hayden remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "What's she paying?" $20 a week plus room and board. It was a pitiful sum for a man of his skills, but something in the sheriff's words had struck a nerve he thought long dead. "I'll think about it," Hayden said finally. "She needs an answer by morning. Those men won't wait much longer." Lancaster placed his hat back on his head. "The Lawson place is 5 miles east of town, just past Cedar Creek." After the sheriff left, Hayden ordered another whiskey. He had no business getting involved in some widow's problems. Yet something about the situation nagged at him. Perhaps it was the mention of Gettysburg, where he'd lost everything that mattered. Or perhaps it was just the prospect of having somewhere to stay besides this god-forsaken saloon. By dawn, he had made his decision. Hayden gathered his few possessions, saddled his stallion, Demon, and rode east out of town as the first rays of sunlight crested the distant mountains. The Lawson homestead came into view as he crested a small rise. It was a modest place, a sturdy cabin with a newer barn behind it. A corral with a few horses, some cultivated fields, and a small creek running along the property's edge. Smoke curled from the chimney, signaling that someone was awake despite the early hour. As Hayden approached, he noticed a small figure on the porch, a woman with a rifle pointed directly at him. "That's far enough, mister," she called out, her voice strong despite its feminine pitch. "State your business." Hayden reined Demon to a halt and raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Sheriff Lancaster sent me, said you might be in need of some help." The rifle barrel didn't waver. "I didn't ask for help." "Maybe not." Hayden studied her from beneath the brim of his hat. "But from what I hear, you need it all the same." The woman hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly. "You're Lockwood? The gunfighter?" "I am." She stepped forward into the morning light, and Hayden felt something he hadn't felt in years: surprise. Violet Lawson was not what he had expected. She was young, perhaps 25, with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face, though tired, bore the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than delicacy. She wore a simple blue dress with the sleeves rolled up, practical for farm work. "I'm Violet Lawson," she said, finally lowering the rifle completely. "And I still don't recall asking the sheriff to send me a hired gun. He seemed to think you needed one." Hayden dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Said some men have been causing trouble." A flash of vulnerability crossed her face before she masked it with determination. "I can handle my own troubles." "Is that why your foreman's laid up with a bullet wound?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "That was a coward shot in the dark. If they'd faced us directly." "They would have killed you both," Hayden finished flatly. "Men like that don't fight fair, Mrs. Lawson." "Miss," she corrected automatically. "I never married James. He died before we could." Hayden nodded, understanding more now. An unmarried woman with a child, trying to maintain a homestead alone, no wonder Vandermeer thought her easy prey. "Sheriff says you're offering $20 a week, plus room and board." Violet's chin lifted. "That's right. For honest work, mind you, not just for standing around looking dangerous." Despite himself, the corner of Hayden's mouth twitched. "I can work, Miss Lawson. Been around horses and cattle most of my life." She studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "There's a room above the barn. It's not much, but it's private. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. I expect you to earn your keep." "Fair enough." Just then, the cabin door opened, and a small boy with the same copper hair as his mother peeked out. "Mama, who's that man?" Violet's expression softened immediately. "This is Mr. Lockwood, Henry. He's going to be helping us for a while." The boy studied Hayden with unabashed curiosity. "Are you a real cowboy? Do you have a gun? Can I see it?" "Henry," Violet admonished, "mind your manners." Hayden found himself unsure how to respond to the child's enthusiasm. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him with anything but fear or hatred. "Yes, I have a gun," he said finally. "And no, you can't see it. Guns aren't toys." Henry looked disappointed but nodded seriously. "That's what Mr. Roberts says too. He got shot by bad men. Is that why you're here? To shoot the bad men?" "Henry!" Violet's face flushed. "That's enough questions. Go inside and finish your breakfast." The boy reluctantly retreated into the cabin. Violet turned back to Hayden, embarrassment and defiance warring in her expression. "You can put your horse in the barn. There's an empty stall next to Thunder, my gelding. When you're settled, come to the house. I'll have breakfast ready and we can discuss your duties." With that, she turned and went back inside, leaving Hayden standing in the yard with Demon's reins in his hand. For a moment, he considered mounting up and riding away. This wasn't his fight. He didn't belong in a place with a woman who looked at him with wary eyes and a boy who asked innocent questions about killing, but something, perhaps the memory of Lancaster's words about the man he used to be, kept him rooted in place. With a sigh, Hayden led Demon toward the barn. He told himself it was just a job, a place to stay for a while, nothing more. He couldn't have known that stepping onto the Lawson homestead would change everything. The barn was well maintained, a testament to Violet's determination to keep the homestead running, despite her challenges. After settling Demon in the stall beside a handsome bay gelding, Hayden took his saddlebags and climbed the ladder to the loft. The room above was simple, but clean. A narrow bed, a small table with a wash basin, a peg for hanging clothes, and a window that overlooked the property. He placed his few possessions on the table, a spare shirt, a shaving kit, ammunition for his revolver, and a worn Bible he never read but couldn't bring himself to discard. It had belonged to his mother, one of the few things he'd kept from his life before the war. After washing the trail dust from his face and hands, Hayden made his way to the cabin. He paused on the porch, hearing voices inside. "But Mama, he looks scary," Henry was saying. "Sometimes we need someone who looks scary to keep the scary people away," Violet replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Lockwood is here to help us." "Is he going to stay forever?" A pause. "No, sweetheart, just until the trouble with Mr. Vandermeer is over." Hayden knocked on the door, ending their conversation. Violet opened it, her expression carefully neutral. "Come in, Mr. Lockwood. Breakfast is ready." The cabin's interior was modest but homey. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair beside it. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the center of the main room. Curtains hung at the windows, and a braided rug covered part of the plank floor. It spoke of a woman who took pride in her home, despite limited means. Henry sat at the table, swinging his legs and eyeing Hayden with renewed curiosity. A plate of biscuits, bacon, and eggs waited at the empty place setting. "Sit down before it gets cold," Violet instructed, pouring coffee into a mug. Hayden removed his hat, feeling strangely out of place. It had been years since he'd sat at a family table. He took the offered seat across from Henry, who continued to stare openly. "Do you kill people, Mr. Lockwood?" the boy asked bluntly. "Henry!" Violet gasped. "That is not an appropriate question." Hayden met the boy's gaze steadily. "I have killed men, yes, but only bad men who were trying to hurt others." "Like the men who shot Mr. Roberts?" "Henry, enough," Violet said firmly. "Eat your breakfast." The boy reluctantly focused on his food, but kept sneaking glances at Hayden. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Hayden ate methodically, appreciating the home-cooked meal, but unaccustomed to the domestic setting. Finally, Violet broke the silence. "Mr. Roberts is our foreman. He's recovering at Doc Mitchell's in town. The bullet went through his shoulder." Her voice was controlled, but Hayden detected an undertone of anger. "It happened 3 nights ago. They came after dark, shot into the house, and then fired the haystack." "How many men?" 3, from what I could tell. They wore bandanas over their faces, but I recognized one of them by his voice, Will Tanner. He works for Vandermeer. She pushed her food around her plate. "They said next time they wouldn't miss." "Why does Vandermeer want your land?" Violet's eyes met his. "Water. Cedar Creek runs year-round, even in the worst droughts. With control of this land, he could dictate terms to half the valley." She straightened her shoulders. "This place belonged to James's parents. He grew up here. I promised him I'd keep it for Henry." Hayden nodded, understanding the stakes. "These men, they'll come back, and they won't be just shooting into the air next time. I know that." Her knuckles whitened around her fork. "That's why, despite my reservations, I'm willing to pay for your help. I'll need to see the property, know the layout, and I'll need to know your routine when you fetch water, when you tend the animals, when Henry plays outside." "You think they'd hurt a child?" Horror filled her voice. Hayden didn't sugarcoat it. Men who want something badly enough will do whatever it takes. The boy needs to understand he can't wander off alone. Henry looked up, eyes wide. "I'm not scared," he declared, though his voice trembled slightly. "That's good," Hayden replied, "but being brave doesn't mean being foolish. You listen to your mother, you hear?" The boy nodded solemnly. After breakfast, Violet showed Hayden around the property. It was about 80 acres in total, with 20 cleared for crops. The creek formed the eastern boundary, providing water for both the household and the small herd of cattle that grazed in the north pasture. James had plans to expand, Violet explained as they walked along the creek. He wanted to build a proper irrigation system, maybe plant an orchard over there. She pointed to a sunny slope. "We were going to do it together." "What happened to him?" Hayden asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Violet's face tightened. "Pneumonia?" "Winter of '72. Henry was just a baby." She touched a small pendant at her throat. "We'd planned to marry that spring." Hayden nodded, not knowing what to say. Comfort had never been his strong suit. They continued their tour in silence until they reached the northern boundary of the property. From there, they could see a larger ranch in the distance. "Vandermeer's place," Violet said, her voice hardening. 3,000 acres and he still wants mine." "Men like that are never satisfied," Hayden commented. "They always want more." "And men like you? What do you want, Mr. Lockwood?" The question caught him off guard. "I stopped wanting things a long time ago, Miss Lawson." She gave him a strange look, as if she didn't quite believe him. "Everyone wants something." Before he could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Hayden instinctively moved in front of Violet, his hand going to his revolver. 3 riders appeared over the rise, slowing their horses when they spotted Hayden and Violet. The leader, a stocky man with a bushy mustache, rode forward a few paces. "Well now, what have we here?" he called out. "Got yourself some help, Miss Lawson?" Violet stepped out from behind Hayden, her chin high. "This is my property, Tanner. You and your friends aren't welcome here." The man, Will Tanner, Hayden presumed, smirked. "Just passing through, madam. Free country, ain't it?" His eyes shifted to Hayden, sizing him up. "Don't believe we've met, mister." "Hayden Lockwood." He said nothing more, letting his reputation speak for itself. The effect was immediate. Tanner's smirk faltered, and the 2 men behind him exchanged nervous glances. The name Lockwood carried weight in these parts. "The gunfighter?" Tanner asked, his voice noticeably less confident. Hayden merely nodded. Tanner tried to recover his bravado. "Well, ain't that interesting? Mr. Vandermeer will surely want to know about this development." "You tell Vandermeer whatever you like," Hayden replied evenly. "But also tell him that any man who sets foot on this property with ill intent won't be leaving it on his own 2 feet. Tanner's face darkened. "Big talk from a hired gun." "It's not talk." Hayden's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes made Tanner shift uncomfortably in his saddle. After a tense moment, Tanner jerked his head at his companions. "We'll be seeing you around, Miss Lawson. Your new friend, too." With that, they wheeled their horses and rode off toward Vandermeer's ranch. Once they were out of earshot, Violet released a shaky breath. That was Will Tanner. The other 2 work for Vandermeer as well, Sam Dobbs and Luke Mercer. "They're the ones who shot your foreman?" She nodded. "I'm certain of it, though I couldn't prove it in court." Hayden watched the retreating riders thoughtfully. "They'll report to Vandermeer, and he'll likely make a move soon. Having me here changes things." "Is that good or bad?" "Depends." Hayden turned to face her. "It might make him more cautious, or it might make him more desperate. Either way, you and Henry need to be especially careful for the next few days." Violet's eyes met his, fear and determination mingling in their depths. "We've managed this far." "And now you don't have to manage alone," Hayden replied, surprised by his own words. Something passed between them in that moment, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of an understanding. Then Violet looked away, breaking the connection. "We should get back. I need to check on Henry." As they walked back to the cabin, Hayden found himself studying Violet Lawson more carefully. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered in his years of drifting. There was a quiet strength about her, a determination that spoke of someone who had faced adversity and refused to be broken by it. He realized with some surprise that he respected her, and that was something he hadn't felt for anyone in a very long time. The next few days fell into an uneasy routine. Hayden rode the boundaries of the property each morning and evening, looking for signs of intruders. During the day, he helped with the farm work, mending fences, tending to the livestock, and repairing the damage from the fire in the haystack. The physical labor felt good after years of idleness, punctuated by bursts of violence. Henry followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions about horses, guns, and his travels. At first, Hayden found the boy's constant chatter irritating, but gradually he grew accustomed to it. There was something refreshing about Henry's straightforward curiosity, untainted by the fear and suspicion Hayden usually encountered. Violet watched their growing friendship with a mixture of concern and relief. One evening, as they sat on the porch after Henry had gone to bed, she brought it up. "He's never known a father figure," she said quietly, her hands busy with mending. "James died before Henry was old enough to remember him." Hayden shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not exactly father material, Miss Lawson. I know that." She glanced at him. "And I've told Henry you won't be staying permanently. But it's good for him to have a man to look up to, even for a short while. He shouldn't be looking up to someone like me." Violet set aside her mending. "And what kind of man are you, Mr. Lockwood?" The question hung in the air between them. Hayden stared out at the darkening landscape, considering his answer. "The kind who's done things he can't take back," he said finally. "Things that can't be forgiven." "Everyone has regrets," Violet replied softly. "Not like mine." Hayden's voice hardened. "You don't know what I've done. I've heard the stories." She met his gaze steadily. "They say you've killed 20 men, that you fought for the Confederacy, that you once shot a man for looking at you wrong. Some of those stories are true, and some aren't." It wasn't a question. "I've watched you these past days, Mr. Lockwood. I've seen how gentle you are with the horses, how patient you are with Henry's endless questions." She paused. "Those aren't the actions of a man without a heart." Hayden looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "Don't mistake necessity for kindness, Miss Lawson. I'm here to do a job, nothing more." "If you say so." She picked up her mending again, a small smile playing at her lips. "Though I notice you fixed the leak in our roof today. That wasn't part of your job description." Before Hayden could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the evening quiet. He was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Lock the door and stay away from the windows." Violet hurried inside without protest. Hayden moved to the side of the porch, keeping to the shadows as 5 riders approached the house. He recognized Tanner, Dobbs, and Mercer among them. The other 2 were strangers, but their hard faces and the way they carried themselves told Hayden they were hired guns. The riders stopped in the yard. Tanner called out, "Miss Lawson, we got a message from Mr. Vandermeer." Hayden stepped forward into the light. "Miss Lawson isn't available. I'll take your message." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Lockwood. Anything concerning this property concerns me." Hayden's voice was calm, but his stance was alert, ready. "State your business." One of the strangers, a tall man with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground. "Mr. Vandermeer's offering $2,000 for the land, cash money. It's more than generous." "Miss Lawson isn't interested in selling." "Then maybe she's interested in staying alive," Tanner sneered. "Accidents happen all the time on these isolated homesteads. Fires, falling, wild animal attacks." Hayden's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered in his eyes. "That sounded like a threat, Tanner." "Take it however you want." Tanner smirked. "But one hired gun can't watch this place day and night. Sooner or later, you'll slip up. Or maybe you'll just decide the money ain't worth the trouble." "You seem to be laboring under a misapprehension," Hayden said, his voice deceptively soft. "I'm not just any hired gun. We know who you are. Lockwood." The pockmarked man cut in. "But even Stoneheart has to sleep sometime." Hayden's hand moved in a blur. Before anyone could react, his gun was cocked and aimed squarely at the pockmarked man's chest. "You're right. I do have to sleep sometime." Hayden's voice remained conversational, though his eyes had gone cold. "But I sleep very lightly, and I wake up shooting." He gestured with his free hand toward the fence post 50 yards away. "See that knot in the post there? About the size of a man's eye, wouldn't you say?" Without looking, he fired. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the yard, and a chunk of wood exploded from the fence post exactly where the knot had been. The 5 men sat frozen on their horses, their faces pale in the fading light. "Next time you come here uninvited," Hayden continued calmly, "I won't be aiming at fence posts. Now, get off this property." For a tense moment, it seemed like the men might be foolish enough to test him. Then Tanner jerked his head, and they wheeled their horses around, riding hard toward Vandermeer's ranch. As the dust settled, the cabin door opened. Violet stood there, a shotgun in her hands, her face pale but determined. "Are they gone?" Hayden holstered his revolver. "For now, but they'll be back, with more men next time." "What did they want?" "Vandermeer's offering $2,000 for your land." Violet's grip tightened on the shotgun. "It's worth 5 times that, and he knows it, but even if he offered 10,000, I wouldn't sell." Hayden studied her. "This place means that much to you?" "It's not just land, Mr. Lockwood." Her voice softened. "It's a home. It's the future I promised James, the legacy I want for Henry." She glanced out at the property, bathed in the purple light of dusk. "Some things are worth fighting for." Something stirred in Hayden's chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. It had been so long since he'd felt anything beyond anger or indifference that he didn't recognize the respect and admiration growing within him. "You should get some rest," he said finally. "I'll keep watch tonight." "All night? You need sleep too." "I've gone longer without sleep." He nodded toward the house. "Go on, check on Henry. I'll be fine." Violet hesitated, then placed a hand briefly on his arm. "Thank you." The simple touch sent an unexpected jolt through him. After she went inside, Hayden took up position on the porch, his thoughts more troubled than they had been in years. He had taken this job expecting it to be simple, intimidate some land grabbers, collect his pay, and move on. But nothing about Violet Lawson or her situation was simple. For the first time in a very long time, Hayden Lockwood cared about what happened to someone else, and that realization disturbed him more than any threat from Vandermeer's men. Dawn broke with a blood-red sky, the kind old-timers claimed was an ill omen. Hayden, who had maintained his vigil through the night, watched the sun rise with weary eyes. He didn't believe in omens, but experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that trouble was coming. The cabin door opened, and Violet emerged with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Hayden, who accepted it gratefully. "You stayed up all night," she observed, concern in her voice. "Told you I would." He sipped the strong coffee, feeling it revive his tired senses. "Any sign of them?" Hayden shook his head. "Too quiet. That worries me more than if they'd tried something." Violet leaned against the porch railing, her copper braid glinting in the early light. "What do you think Vandermeer will do next?" "Hard to say. A smart man would realize intimidation isn't working and try a different approach. But men like Vandermeer aren't used to being denied what they want. My guess is he'll escalate." "How?" Hayden met her gaze directly. "However he thinks will hurt you most." Violet paled but nodded resolutely. "Then we'll be ready." "I need to ride into town today," Hayden said after a moment. "Check in with the sheriff, see what he knows about Vandermeer's recent movements. Maybe visit your foreman, get his account of what happened." "I'll come with you?" At Hayden's questioning look, she added, "We need supplies anyway, and Henry's been cooped up here for days. It would do him good to see something besides these 4 walls." Hayden wanted to argue town meant exposure, vulnerability, but he could see the determination in her eyes, and in truth, keeping her and Henry under his direct supervision might be safer than leaving them at the homestead alone. "All right," he conceded, "but we stay together, no wandering off." They set out after breakfast, Violet and Henry in the wagon, Hayden riding Demon alongside. Henry's excitement was palpable. The boy bounced on the wagon seat, pointing out everything he saw as if it were the most fascinating sight imaginable. "Look, Mr. Lockwood, a jackrabbit. Do you think it has babies somewhere?" "Have you ever eaten jackrabbit? Mama made jackrabbit stew once, but I didn't like it much." Hayden found himself responding to the boy's enthusiasm, despite his vigilance. "Yes, I've eaten jackrabbit. Makes decent eating if you're hungry enough." "Were you ever so hungry you had to eat something yucky?" "Henry," Violet admonished gently, "that's a personal question." "It's all right," Hayden surprised himself by saying. "Yes, Henry, I've been that hungry. During the war, we sometimes ate things I won't describe to you because your mother would have my hide." The boy's eyes widened. "You fought in the war? Did you kill lots of Yankees?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Hayden regretted opening this line of conversation. The war was not something he discussed, not even with other veterans. "The war was a long time ago," he said finally. "And killing isn't something to brag about, no matter which side you're on." Henry looked chastened. "I'm sorry." "No need to be sorry for asking questions. Just remember that some questions touch on painful memories for folks." Violet gave Hayden a grateful look over Henry's head. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of shared pain, though of different kinds. The town of Cedar Ridge came into view, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. It was market day, and the street was busy with wagons and horses tied up outside the general store. Hayden scanned the crowd with practiced eyes, noting familiar faces and strangers alike. "Let's go to the sheriff's office first," he suggested. "Then we can see to your supplies." They found Sheriff Lancaster at his desk, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing wanted posters. He looked up as they entered, surprise and relief crossing his weathered features. "Miss Lawson, Lockwood, good to see you both in one piece." "No thanks to Vandermeer's men," Violet replied crisply. "They've been by twice now, Sheriff, making threats." Lancaster sighed heavily. "I heard. Can't do much without proof, though." "We're not here for excuses," Hayden cut in. "We need information. What's Vandermeer planning?" The sheriff set down his coffee. "Word is he's bringing in more men. 3 rode in yesterday, stayed at the saloon. Hard cases from the look of them." Hayden cursed under his breath, mindful of Henry, who was examining the sheriff's collection of badges with fascination. "Anything else?" "He's been meeting with Judge Wilson, closed-door sessions." Lancaster lowered his voice. "Might be trying to find a legal angle to force Miss Lawson out." "What legal angle?" Violet demanded. "My claim is solid. James's parents homesteaded that land legally, and he inherited it properly. All the paperwork is in order." "I don't know, Miss Lawson. Just telling you what I heard." The sheriff rubbed his bristly chin. "How's Roberts doing?" "That's our next stop," Violet said. "He's still at Doc Mitchell's." "Well, when you see him, tell him I need his statement, official-like, written down and signed." Lancaster's eyes held a message. He was trying to build a case against Vandermeer, but needed evidence. "We'll tell him," Hayden promised. Then, to Violet, "We should go. I don't like staying in one place too long." As they turned to leave, Lancaster called after them. "Watch yourselves. Vandermeer's not a man who likes to lose." Outside, the street seemed even busier. Hayden kept a watchful eye as they made their way to the doctor's office, his hand never straying far from his revolver. He noted several unfamiliar faces, hard-looking men, who watched them with too much interest. Dr. Mitchell's office was a small building with a shingle hanging outside that simply read "Physician." Inside, they found the doctor changing the bandages on Frank Roberts' shoulder. Roberts, a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair, brightened at the sight of them. "Miss Violet and young Henry, God, it's good to see friendly faces." Henry rushed to the bed. "Mr. Roberts, does your shoulder hurt real bad? Did they dig the bullet out? Can I see the hole?" "Henry!" Violet scolded, but Roberts laughed. "Still full of questions, I see." He ruffled the boy's hair with his good hand. "Yes, it hurt. Yes, they dug it out. And no, you can't see the hole because it's all bandaged up." His smile faded as he noticed Hayden. "You must be Lockwood. Sheriff told me he was sending for you." He extended his hand. "Frank Roberts, I'd be obliged if you'd keep these two safe until I'm back on my feet." Hayden shook the offered hand, sensing a good man in Roberts. "Doing my best." "How are you feeling, Frank?" Violet asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Better every day. Doc says I can leave day after tomorrow, though I won't be much use with this arm for a while." Roberts grimaced. "I'm sorry, Miss Violet. I should have been more careful." "Nonsense. You couldn't have known they'd shoot from ambush like cowards." Violet's voice was fierce with loyalty. Dr. Mitchell, a thin man with spectacles and a kind face, finished tying off the bandage. "The wound is healing well. No infection, which is the main concern with gunshot injuries. But you'll need to take it easy for at least a month, Mr. Roberts." "A month?" Roberts looked dismayed. "Miss Violet needs me now, Doc?" "She needs you alive and with 2 working arms," the doctor replied firmly. "Push too hard, and you could lose the use of that shoulder permanently." Hayden, who had been watching the street through the window, turned back to the group. "Sheriff wants your official statement about the shooting, says he's building a case." Roberts nodded grimly. "He'll get it. I recognize Tanner's voice plain as day. He was the one who fired the shot." "That still might not be enough," Hayden cautioned. "It's your word against theirs." "Well, it's something," Violet said. "And right now, we need every advantage we can get." She touched Robert's good shoulder. "Rest and get better, Frank. We're managing." After promising to visit again before heading back to the homestead, they left the doctor's office and made their way to the general store. Hayden remained alert, noting that the same hard-faced strangers he'd spotted earlier were now loitering outside the saloon across the street, watching them openly. Inside the general store, Violet efficiently gathered the supplies they needed: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for the shotgun, and a few small luxuries like peppermint sticks for Henry. The storekeeper, a jovial man named Peterson, chatted as he tallied their purchases. "Heard about your trouble with Vandermeer, Miss Lawson. Shameful business, that." He leaned across the counter. "You're not alone, though. Half the small landowners in the county have had run-ins with him. Man's determined to own everything from here to the territorial line." "Has he succeeded?" Hayden asked. Peterson nodded soberly. "More often than not. The Wilsons sold out last month after their barn burned down. Accident, they called it, but everyone knows better." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You watch yourselves. Vandermeer was in here yesterday, talking with some rough-looking fellows. Heard him mention your name, Miss Lawson? Thank you for the warning, Mr. Peterson." Violet paid for their supplies, her expression betraying none of the fear she must have felt. As Hayden helped load the purchases into the wagon, he spotted one of the strangers from the saloon walking purposefully toward them. He was a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek, and his right hand hovered near his holstered revolver. "Miss Lawson," the man called out, "got a message for you." Hayden stepped in front of Violet and Henry. "I'll take the message." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You Lockwood?" "I am." A thin smile spread across the scarred face. "Message is for you too, then. Mr. Vandermeer invites you both to dinner at his ranch tomorrow evening. Says he wants to discuss a business proposition that could benefit everyone." Hayden didn't blink. "Tell Vandermeer that Miss Lawson isn't interested in selling at any price." "Now, that's not very hospitable," the stranger drawled. "Mr. Vandermeer's offering an olive branch here. Might be wise to accept it." "We appreciate the invitation," Violet said from behind Hayden, her voice steady. "But we must decline. If Mr. Vandermeer wishes to speak with us, he can come to our property during daylight hours." The scarred man's eyes hardened. "He won't take kindly to being refused, madam." "That's his problem," Hayden replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to." For a tense moment, it seemed the messenger might push the issue. Then he shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to be threatening. "Suit yourselves. But Mr. Vandermeer always gets what he wants, one way or another." With that, he turned and sauntered back to the saloon. Hayden helped Violet and Henry into the wagon, then mounted Demon. "We should head back. I don't like the feel of this town today." As they made their way down the main street, Hayden couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. It wasn't just Vandermeer's men. It was the way the townspeople looked at them with pity, as if they were already defeated. They were halfway home when Hayden spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Riders moving fast, cutting across country to intercept them before they reached the homestead. "Trouble," he said tersely, pointing. 5 riders coming hard." Violet's face paled as she saw the approaching horsemen. "Vandermeer's men?" "Most likely." Hayden made a quick decision. "There's a stand of cottonwoods about a quarter-mile ahead, near the creek bend. Head there. I'll try to lead them off." "No!" Violet's voice was sharp with fear. "We stay together. Violet, there's 5 of them. And you have Henry to think about." Hayden's use of her first name surprised them both. "I can handle myself. Get to those trees, find cover, and wait. If I'm not back in an hour, take the back trail to town and go straight to the sheriff." Before she could argue further, Hayden spurred Demon into a gallop, angling away from the wagon, making himself a visible target. As he'd hoped, 3 of the riders broke off to pursue him, while 2 continued toward the wagon. Hayden led his pursuers on a chase across the open country, letting them think they were gaining on him, then suddenly wheeling Demon around to face them. The unexpected move caused the 3 riders to pull up short, momentarily confused. Hayden recognized Tanner among them. The other 2 were strangers, likely the hired guns the sheriff had mentioned. "That's far enough," Hayden called out, his revolver now in hand. "You boys seem lost." Tanner sneered. "Not lost at all, Lockwood. Just delivering another message from Mr. Vandermeer. You could have delivered it in town, saved yourself a hard ride. This message is better delivered private-like." One of the strangers, a hulking man with a bushy beard, patted his revolver meaningfully. "Mr. Vandermeer says you got till sundown tomorrow to clear out. The woman can take the boy and $2,000, or she can take nothing, her choice. And if we refuse," Tanner's smile was ugly, "then Mr. Vandermeer can't be responsible for what happens next." Hayden's expression didn't change, but something cold and deadly entered his eyes. "You tell Vandermeer that if any harm comes to Miss Lawson or her boy, I'll personally ensure he doesn't live long enough to enjoy her water rights." The bearded man laughed. "Big talk from a man outnumbered 3-1 right now. You think those are bad odds?" Hayden's voice was soft, dangerous. "The first man who reaches for his gun dies before his finger touches the trigger. The second man might get a shot off, but it'll go wild when my bullet hits him. The third man might have a chance, but those aren't odds I'd bet on." The confidence in his voice gave the men pause. Hayden Lockwood's reputation wasn't built on empty threats. "Just delivering the message," Tanner said finally, some of the bravado gone from his voice. "Sundown tomorrow. Remember that?" With that, the 3 wheeled their horses around and rode off toward Vandermeer's ranch. Hayden watched them go, then turned Demon toward the Cottonwood Grove, where he'd sent Violet and Henry. His mind raced with this new development. Vandermeer was escalating faster than expected. The deadline meant they had less than 36 hours to prepare for whatever came next. He found Violet and Henry hidden among the trees, the wagon concealed behind a thicket. Violet held the shotgun ready, her face set with determination. When she saw Hayden, relief flooded her features. "You're all right?" she breathed. "I'm fine. The other 2 riders?" "They followed us for a while, then turned back when they saw us heading for the trees." Violet lowered the shotgun. "What did they want?" Hayden dismounted, taking Demon's reins in hand. "Same as before. Vandermeer wants you out. He set a deadline sundown tomorrow." "Or what?" Hayden met her gaze directly. "Or things get worse." Henry, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "Are the bad men going to hurt us, Mr. Lockwood?" The fear in the boy's voice stirred something protective in Hayden's chest. "Not if I have anything to say about it, Henry." "Can you shoot them all, like in the stories?" "Henry!" Violet exclaimed. It's not like the stories, Henry," Hayden interrupted gently. "Real fighting isn't glorious or exciting. It's dangerous and ugly, and good people can get hurt." The boy considered this. "But sometimes you have to fight, right? To protect what's yours?" Hayden exchanged a look with Violet. "Sometimes," he agreed, "but only when there's no other choice." They returned to the wagon, and Hayden helped Violet up to the seat. As they continued toward the homestead, a plan began to form in his mind. If Vandermeer was determined to make his move at sundown tomorrow, they needed to be ready. The homestead appeared peaceful in the afternoon light, but Hayden knew it was an illusion. This quiet farmhouse had become the center of a struggle that would likely end in violence. His job was to ensure that violence didn't touch Violet or Henry. As they unloaded the supplies, Hayden outlined his thoughts. "We need to prepare the house. Board up the windows on the north and east sides, they're most exposed. Move your bedroom and Henry's to the back rooms, away from potential gunfire." Violet nodded, her face grim. "What about the barn? The animals?" "I'll move the horses to the small corral by the creek. It's more sheltered. The cattle are far enough out in the north pasture that they should be safe." And then, Hayden hesitated. Then we wait, but not passively. I have a few ideas that might discourage Vandermeer's men from getting too close. That evening, after Henry was asleep, Hayden and Violet sat at the kitchen table, going over their preparations. The windows were boarded, essential supplies moved to the root cellar in case they needed to shelter there, and Hayden had rigged some basic alarms around the perimeter of the yard, tin cans on strings that would rattle if disturbed. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it'll give us some warning." Violet stared into her cup of tea, her copper braid falling over one shoulder. "Do you think they'll really attack in force?" "I think Vandermeer is a man used to getting his way. Your refusal has made this personal for him." Hayden chose his words carefully. "But having me here complicates things for him. He knows my reputation." "Is your reputation earned?" she asked quietly, meeting his eyes. "Are you really as dangerous as they say?" Hayden was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Or I was. There was a time after the war when killing came easy to me. Too easy." "What changed?" He looked away. "Who says anything changed?" "You did." Violet's voice was soft but insistent. "Not with words, but I've watched you with Henry, with the animals. There's gentleness there, however much you try to hide it." Hayden felt exposed, as if she could see through the hardened exterior he'd cultivated for so long. It was an uncomfortable feeling. "War changes a man," he said finally. "I went in believing in causes and honor, came out believing in nothing but my own survival." He stared at his scarred hands. "Lost my family farm during the fighting. Lost my parents to a fever before I could make it back. Had nothing left but a gun and the skill to use it." "I'm sorry," Violet said, and he could hear the genuine empathy in her voice. "Don't be. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't always heal wounds, Mr. Lockwood. Sometimes it just teaches us to live with the pain." Their eyes met across the table, and Hayden felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared understanding. They were both survivors, in their own ways. "You should get some rest," he said finally, breaking the moment. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Violet nodded and stood, but paused at the door to her bedroom. "What about you? You haven't slept properly in days." "I'll sleep when this is over." When she looked unconvinced, he added, "I promise I'll wake you in a few hours to take watch. We both need to be alert tomorrow." After she retired, Hayden checked his revolver, cleaning it methodically. Then he took up position by the window, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of movement. His conversation with Violet had unsettled him, stirring memories and emotions he'd long suppressed. For years, he'd lived behind a wall of indifference, taking jobs that required his gun, but never his heart. It had been safer that way. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got a man killed. Yet here he was, preparing to defend a woman and child he'd known for less than a week, feeling more alive than he had in years. The irony wasn't lost on him. Men called him Stone Heart, claimed his humanity had died on some forgotten battlefield. Perhaps they'd been right. Until now, because something was changing within him, thawing like spring ice in the warm light of Violet's courage and Henry's innocence. And that terrified him more than any gunfight. Dawn broke clear and bright, giving no hint of the confrontation to come. Hayden, who had allowed himself only a few hours of restless sleep, was already awake and alert when Violet emerged from her bedroom, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Any sign of them?" she asked, quickly braiding her hair into its usual practical style. "Nothing yet, but they'll come." Hayden watched her move about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "You should take Henry to town today. Stay with the sheriff until this is over." Violet's hands stilled. "We've had this discussion. I'm not abandoning my home." "It's not abandonment. It's protecting your son." "And who protects you?" She turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "This isn't just your fight, Mr. Lockwood." "It became my fight when I took your money," he countered. "Is that all this is to you? A job?" The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. Hayden looked away. "You know it's not." Before Violet could respond, Henry emerged from his room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Mama. Morning, Mr. Lockwood. Are the bad men coming today?" The innocent question hung in the air. Violet knelt before her son, brushing his copper hair from his forehead. "Henry, I need you to listen carefully. Today might be dangerous. If I tell you to hide, you go to the root cellar immediately. Don't argue, don't wait. Just go. Can you promise me that?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I promise. Mama." "Good." She kissed his forehead. "Now, let's have breakfast. We all need our strength today." The morning passed with tense anticipation. Hayden checked and rechecked their defenses, positioned ammunition at strategic points around the house, and moved the horses to the sheltered corral as planned. Violet cleaned her shotgun and prepared bandages and water, just in case. By noon, the waiting had become almost unbearable. Henry, sensing the tension, stayed unusually quiet, playing with his wooden soldiers on the cabin floor. "They're waiting for sundown," Hayden said, as he and Violet stood on the porch, surveying the peaceful homestead. "It's what they promised, and they'll stick to it. Makes it more intimidating that way." "Or they want the cover of darkness," Violet suggested. "Possibly. Either way, we have hours yet." He glanced at her. "You're not afraid?" It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "I'm terrified, but fear doesn't help us survive." Hayden nodded, impressed by her pragmatism. "Fear can keep you alive, if you use it right. Makes you cautious, alert. Is that what you feel? Caution?" He considered the question. "I feel responsible for you and Henry. It's been a long time since I felt responsible for anyone but myself." Violet studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "And how does that feel?" "Uncomfortable," he admitted. "But not in a way I mind." The admission seemed to please her. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, almost carefree. Hayden found himself smiling back, the gesture unfamiliar but not unpleasant. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats many horses, approaching fast. "Inside," Hayden ordered, his hand going to his revolver. "Get Henry to the back room." Violet didn't argue. She hurried inside, calling for Henry. Hayden remained on the porch, counting the approaching riders. 8 men, including Tanner and the scarred messenger from town. No sign of Vandermeer himself. The coward was sending his men to do his dirty work. The riders pulled up about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. The scarred man urged his horse forward a few paces. "Time's up, Lockwood," he called. "Mr. Vandermeer wants his answer. Does the woman take the money and leave, or do we do this the hard way?" "You're early," Hayden replied calmly. "Sundown's not for hours yet." "Mr. Vandermeer got impatient. The scarred man grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "So, what's it going to be?" The cabin door opened, and Violet stepped out, shotgun in hand. She stood beside Hayden, her face resolute. "My answer hasn't changed. This is my land, and I'm not selling. Not for 2,000, not for 20,000. The scarred man's grin faded. "That's unfortunate, madam. Mr. Vandermeer was hoping you'd be reasonable." "There's nothing reasonable about threatening a woman and child," Hayden cut in. "Tell Vandermeer if he wants this land, he'll have to come take it himself. If he's man enough." Tanner spat on the ground. "Big words, Lockwood, but you're outnumbered 8-2. "Wouldn't be the first time." Hayden's voice was deadly calm. "Some of you might get lucky and kill me, but how many of you will die first? Who wants to be the first to find out?" A tense silence fell. The hired guns exchanged uncertain glances. Hayden Lockwood's reputation gave them pause. "We didn't come to talk all day," the scarred man said finally. "This is your last chance, woman. Take the money and clear out, or we burn you out." "My name is Violet Lawson," she replied, her voice steady. "And I suggest you and your friends leave my property before someone gets hurt." The scarred man's face darkened with anger. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the distant sound of galloping horses. All heads turned to see a group of riders approaching from the direction of town, at least a dozen men, led by Sheriff Lancaster. They rode hard, raising dust in their wake. Well, Hayden said softly. "Looks like the odds just changed." The scarred man cursed. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." With that, he wheeled his horse around, and Vandermeer's men retreated, riding hard toward the northwest. Sheriff Lancaster and his posse arrived moments later, their horses lathered from the hard ride. "Looks like we got here just in time," Lancaster said, dismounting stiffly. Frank Roberts rode out to the surrounding homesteads last night, despite his injury. Spread the word about what Vandermeer was planning. These men are all small ranchers and farmers who've had their own troubles with him. Hayden looked at the determined faces of the posse ordinary men who had decided to take a stand. Good timing, Sheriff. We would have been here sooner, but we had a stop to make first. Lancaster's smile was grim with satisfaction. Arrested Vandermeer an hour ago. Judge Wilson signed the warrant this morning. Violet gasped. On what charges? Attempted murder, for starters. Frank's testimony about the shooting was enough for the judge once we found matching shell casings at Vandermeer's ranch. And one of his men got liquored up last night, started bragging about their plans for today. Witness heard everything. Relief washed over Violet's face. Is it over then? Really over? Vandermeer will stand trial. His men are scattering already rats leaving a sinking ship. Lancaster gazed at the retreating dust cloud. They might try something desperate, though. We'll keep men here for a few days, just to be safe. Henry burst from the cabin, having heard the commotion. Mama, did we win? Did Mr. Lockwood shoot all the bad men? Violet laughed, the sound bright with relief. No shooting was necessary, thank goodness. The sheriff and our neighbors came to help. Henry looked disappointed. But Mr. Lockwood was going to be the hero. He already is, Henry, Violet said softly, her eyes meeting Hayden's. He stayed when he could have left. That makes him a hero in my book. Hayden felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest at her words. For so long, he'd been defined by his ability to instill fear, to deal death, to be called a hero for choosing not to fight. It was a strange feeling, but not an unwelcome one. As the tension of the day ebbed, Violet invited the sheriff and the posse to stay for a meal. The men gratefully accepted, and soon the homestead was filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Hayden found himself watching from the periphery, more comfortable observing than participating. Not one for crowds, are you? Sheriff Lancaster appeared beside him, offering a cup of coffee. Hayden accepted it with a nod. Not particularly. Can't say I'm surprised. The sheriff studied him thoughtfully. You know, when I suggested you for this job, I had my doubts. Wondered if I was making a mistake, sending a man with your reputation to protect a woman and child. Why did you then? Lancaster's weathered face creased in a smile. Because I remembered who you were before. The young man who came back from the war damaged but not destroyed. I figured if anything could remind you of that man, it would be someone like Violet Lawson. Hayden said nothing, but his gaze drifted to where Violet stood, serving food to their guests, her copper braid gleaming in the fading light. She's a remarkable woman, Lancaster continued. Lost everything but didn't let it break her. Reminded me a bit of you, actually. We're nothing alike, Hayden protested. No? The sheriff chuckled. Both stubborn as mules, both loyal to a fault, both carrying burdens most folks would have crumpled under. He clapped Hayden on the shoulder. Think about it, son. Life's too short to spend it alone. With that cryptic advice, Lancaster moved off to join the others, leaving Hayden with thoughts he wasn't ready to examine too closely. As evening fell, the visitors began to depart, promising to take turns keeping watch on the homestead for the next few days. Soon only Hayden, Violet, and Henry remained, the cabin oddly quiet after the day's events. Henry had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the excitement. Violet covered him with a blanket, then joined Hayden on the porch. The western sky was a blaze of orange and purple as the sun set the deadline that had loomed so threateningly now, passing without incident. I should check the perimeter, Hayden said, reluctant to break the peaceful moment, but still conscious of potential threats. In a minute, Violet replied. Sit with me first. They settled on the porch steps, watching the colors fade from the sky. The silence between them was comfortable, laden with unspoken thoughts. What will you do now? Violet asked finally. With Vandermeer arrested, my need for protection is considerably diminished. The question caught Hayden off guard. He'd been so focused on the immediate threat that he hadn't considered what would come after. The thought of leaving the homestead, leaving Violet and Henry, created an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. I suppose I'll move on, he said, the words feeling hollow. That's what I'd do. Is it what you want to do? He glanced at her, surprised by the directness of the question. What I want hasn't mattered for a long time. It matters to me." Violet's voice was soft but steady. "These past days, having you here, it's made me realize something." "What's that?" "That I've been lonely. Not just for help with the homestead, but for companionship. For someone to share the burden and the joy." She met his gaze, her green eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Henry needs a father figure in his life, and She hesitated. "I find myself wishing you would stay, not as a hired gun, but as something more." Hayden felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Her words awakened possibilities he had long since abandoned: a home, a family, a life beyond the next gunfight. "Violet," he began, uncertain how to respond. I don't know how to be what you and Henry need. I've been alone too long." "I'm not asking you to change who you are." She reached out, her hand covering his. "I'm asking you to remember who you were. The man Sheriff Lancaster knew before the war. The man I've glimpsed these past days, gentle with Henry, protective of our home, willing to stand against impossible odds, not just because I paid you, but because it was right." Her touch sent warmth through him, breaking through barriers he'd built around his heart. "And if that man no longer exists, what if there's nothing left but Stoneheart?" Violet's smile was gentle but knowing. "Then explain why you fixed Henry's wooden horse when you thought no one was looking, or why you've been teaching him to read tracks, or why you check on him every night before you take your watch." Hayden had no answer for that. The truth was, somewhere in the past week, the boy had worked his way past Hayden's defenses, and so had Violet, with her quiet strength and unflinching courage. "I don't know if I can be what you hope," he said finally, "but I find myself wanting to try." The admission cost him something, a piece of the armor he'd worn for so long, but the look in Violet's eyes made it worthwhile. "That's all I'm asking for," she said softly. "A chance. For all of us." Hayden looked out at the homestead, the fields waiting for harvest, the creek flowing steadily, the barn he'd helped repair. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the next day, the next job, a future here, with Violet and Henry. "I'll stay," he said simply, "for as long as you'll have me." Violet's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Without a word, she leaned closer and pressed her lips to his, a gentle kiss that held the promise of healing, of new beginnings. When they parted, Hayden felt something he'd thought long dead stir within him: hope. The heart men claimed was stone had begun to beat again, warmed by a woman's tears and a child's trust. "I should still check the perimeter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Violet nodded, understanding his need for space to process what had just happened between them. "I'll be here when you get back." The simple promise meant more to him than any vow. As Hayden walked the boundaries of what might become his home, he marveled at the turn his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing but his gun and his reputation. Now, he had the chance at something he'd believed forever lost to him: a family, a purpose beyond violence. It wouldn't be easy. Men like Tanner and the others who'd ridden with Vandermeer might seek revenge. His reputation would follow him, bringing others looking to make a name by challenging the infamous Stoneheart. And his own demons, the memories of war, the years of solitude, wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Hayden Lockwood looked toward the future with something other than resignation. And that, he decided, as he turned back toward the warm light of the cabin where Violet waited, was worth fighting for. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day in the Arizona Territory. Hayden woke early, having spent the night in the barn loft as usual, despite Violet's suggestion that he might be more comfortable in the cabin. Some transitions, he felt, should not be rushed. As he made his way to the cabin for breakfast, he spotted Henry already outside, feeding the chickens. The boy's face lit up when he saw Hayden. "Mr. Lockwood, Mama says you're staying. Is it true? Are you going to live here with us forever and ever?" The innocent question made Hayden pause. Forever was a concept he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. "I'm staying for now, Henry. We'll see about forever. But you like it here, don't you? And you like me and Mama?" Hayden couldn't help but smile at the boy's directness. "Yes, I like it here. And I like you and your Mama very much." This seemed to satisfy Henry. Good, 'cause I told Johnny Wilson that you were the bravest man in the whole territory, and it'd be embarrassing if you left after I said that. Well, we can't have you being embarrassed, Hayden replied solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. Better finish those chickens before breakfast gets cold. Inside, Violet was at the stove, her copper braid neat as always. She smiled when Hayden entered, a soft, private smile that warmed him more than the fire in the hearth. Sleep well? She asked, setting a plate of biscuits on the table. Well enough. He hung his hat on the peg by the door, a small gesture, but one that felt significant. Sheriff Lancaster rode by at dawn, no sign of trouble in the night. That's good news. Violet poured coffee into a mug and handed it to him, their fingers brushing. Frank Roberts is coming by today. Says he's well enough to start light duties, despite what the doctor says. Stubborn man. Reminds me of someone else I know, she teased gently. Before Hayden could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their moment. Frank Roberts stood on the porch, his arm in a sling, but his face bright with health. Morning, Miss Violet Lockwood. He nodded to each of them. Hope I'm not intruding on breakfast. Not at all, Frank. Come in. Violet ushered him inside. Though I must say, you're supposed to be resting that shoulder. Roberts waved off her concern. Can't keep a good man down, Miss Violet. Besides, I've got news. He accepted the coffee Violet offered and settled at the table. Vandermeer's being transferred to Prescott for trial. Federal charges now seems he's been involved in more than just land grabbing, fraud, extortion, even murder for hire. That's welcome news, Hayden commented. Should keep him occupied for quite some time. If he doesn't hang, Roberts added grimly. Also, his men have scattered. Tanner and that scarred fellow Wells is his name we're seen heading for New Mexico territory. Don't think they'll be back anytime soon. Violet's relief was palpable. So, it really is over? Looks that way. Roberts glanced between Violet and Hayden, a knowing look in his eyes. Sheriff mentioned you might be staying on, Lockwood. That true? Hayden met Violet's gaze across the table. Yes. If that's all right with you, Roberts. This is your place, too. The foreman laughed. More than all right. Been trying to convince Miss Violet to hire more help for months. Having a man of your skills around will be a blessing. He sobered. Though I reckon you'll be more than just hired help, from the looks of things. Violet blushed, but didn't contradict him. Nothing's been decided yet, Frank. Course not, Roberts agreed, though his smile suggested he thought otherwise. Well, I just wanted to deliver the news. Best be getting back to my cabin. Doctor says I should rest after all. After Roberts left, an awkward silence fell between Hayden and Violet. Henry had gone outside again, leaving them alone. He's right, you know, Hayden said finally. Nothing has been decided. If you need time... I don't need time, Violet interrupted gently. I know what I want, Hayden. I've known since the moment you stayed to face Vandermeer's men, when you could have simply taken your pay and left. And what is it you want? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. A partner. Someone to share this life with. Someone who sees the value in what I'm building here. Not just the land or the water rights. She moved closer to him. Someone who treats my son with kindness and respect. Someone who makes me feel safe, not because he carries a gun, but because he carries honor in his heart. Hayden swallowed hard. That's a lot to live up to. You already do. She took his hand, her smaller one fitting perfectly within his calloused palm. I don't expect perfection, Hayden. I know you carry scars, just as I do. But we can heal together, if you're willing. Looking into her eyes, Hayden saw something he'd never thought to find again: acceptance. Not just of who he was now, but of who he had been, and who he might become. I'm willing, he said softly. God knows I'm willing. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that soothed Hayden's restless spirit. Mornings were for chores, tending the animals, repairing fences, preparing for the coming winter. Afternoons often found him working alongside Roberts, learning the specifics of the homestead's operation. Evenings were for sitting on the porch with Violet, talking about everything and nothing, while Henry played nearby or sat at Hayden's feet, listening to stories of far-off places. Slowly, Hayden began to shed the persona of Stone Heart. He still wore his revolver, old habits died hard, and the frontier remained a dangerous place, but he no longer felt defined by his ability to use it. Instead, he found satisfaction in creating rather than destroying, building a new stall in the barn, digging an irrigation ditch for the spring planting, carving a set of wooden animals for Henry's birthday. The town's attitude toward him changed as well. Where once he'd been viewed with fear and suspicion, now he was greeted with cautious respect when he accompanied Violet to town for supplies. The fact that he had stood against Vandermeer, whom many had feared but few had dared oppose, earned him a measure of acceptance among the townsfolk. As winter settled over the territory, bringing short days and long, cold nights, Hayden found himself more content than he could ever remember being. The cabin, once Violet's alone, had gradually become their shared home. His few possessions had migrated from the barn loft to the main house, taking up residence alongside Violet's things as naturally as if they had always belonged there. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside, Hayden sat at the table crafting a small wooden horse for Henry's Christmas gift. Violet was by the fire, mending one of his shirts. The domesticity of the scene would have been unthinkable to him a few months ago. "I received a letter from the bank today," Violet said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About Vandermeer's trial." Hayden looked up from his work. "What did it say?" "He's been convicted, 20 years in territorial prison." She set aside her mending. "It feels strange. For so long, he was this looming threat. Now, he's just gone." "Are you relieved?" "Yes, but also, I don't know. It's as if a chapter has closed." She smiled at him across the room. "A difficult chapter, but one that brought you to us. So I can't regret it entirely." Hayden set down his carving knife. "I've been thinking about that, about fate, or providence, or whatever you want to call it." He rose and moved to join her by the fire. "All those years wandering, taking jobs that slowly killed whatever humanity I had left. They were leading me here, to you." Violet's eyes softened. "I believe that. I believe we find the people we're meant to find when we're ready to find them." "I wasn't ready when I arrived," Hayden admitted. "I was still hardened, cold." "Not cold," she corrected gently. "Protective, of yourself, of a heart that had been wounded too many times." He took her hand, marveling at how such a simple touch could mean so much. "You changed that, you and Henry, made me remember what it was to feel something beyond anger or indifference." Violet's free hand rose to touch his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "And what do you feel now, Hayden Lockwood?" "Everything," he answered honestly. "Hope, fear, joy, but mostly—" He hesitated, the word still difficult after so long. "Love. I love you, Violet. You and Henry both." The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous despite its simplicity. Violet's eyes filled with tears not of sorrow, but of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first day, when you faced down Tanner and his men without flinching. Not because you weren't afraid, but because you were willing to stand between us and danger despite your fear." Hayden gathered her into his arms, holding her close as if she might disappear. For so long, he'd believed himself incapable of this, of loving, of being loved in return. The war, the years of violence that followed, had convinced him that whatever capacity for tenderness he'd once possessed had been burned away, leaving only ashes. How wrong he had been. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words surprising even him. "Not someday, not when things settle down. Now, soon." Violet drew back slightly to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you certain? Marriage is—" "The only thing I've been certain of in 20 years, he interrupted. "I've wasted too much time already. I don't want to waste another day." Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Hayden Lockwood." The kiss they shared sealed the promise not their first, but perhaps the most meaningful. When they parted, Hayden felt a peace he'd thought forever beyond his reach. "We should tell Henry," Violet said, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "In the morning, he'll be so excited." Hayden nodded, already imagining the boy's reaction. Henry had taken to calling him Mr. Hayden in recent weeks, a small step toward the familiarity of family, but one that had meant the world to Hayden. "He'll have questions," he warned, smiling. "Lots of questions." "He always does," Violet laughed softly. "He asked me yesterday if you were going to be his papa now. I told him that was up to you." Hayden's heart constricted at the thought. "I'd be honored to be his father, though I'm still learning how." "Parenthood is all learning, Hayden. Every day brings new challenges, new joys." She squeezed his hand. "We'll learn together." As the fire crackled and snow continued to fall outside, Hayden allowed himself to fully embrace the future that lay before them. Not just the immediate future marriage, raising Henry, building the homestead, but the years beyond. Growing old together, watching Henry become a man, perhaps having more children of their own. It was a future he'd never dared to imagine for himself. A future he'd believed was meant for other men, better men, untainted by war and killing. Yet here it was, offered freely by a woman who saw past his scars to the heart beneath. A heart that, despite what men had claimed, had never truly died. It had only been waiting for Violet's tears to water it back to bloom. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, in the small white church in Cedar Ridge. Snow had fallen the night before, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland that matched the occasion's joyful spirit. The townspeople turned out in force, not just to witness the union of Violet Lawson and the notorious Hayden Lockwood, but to celebrate a love story that had captivated the community. Sheriff Lancaster stood as Hayden's best man, his weathered face beaming with satisfaction at the role he'd played in bringing the couple together. Frank Roberts gave Violet away, his injured arm now fully healed, and Henry, dressed in his Sunday best, proudly carried the rings, his copper hair slicked down for the occasion. As Violet walked down the aisle, Hayden felt his breath catch. She wore a simple dress of deep blue velvet, her copper hair adorned with winter berries and evergreen. But it was the radiance in her face that truly stunned him, a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate the church from within. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Hayden kissed his bride, the cheers from the assembled guests nearly raised the rafters. The celebration continued at the Lawson now, Lockwood homestead, where tables groaned with food contributed by neighbors and friends. Music filled the air as a fiddler played lively tunes, and children darted between the adults' legs, giddy with excitement. Amidst the festivities, Hayden found a moment of quiet on the porch with his new wife. The winter air was crisp, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Violet leaned into him, her warmth a contrast to the cold night. "More than I ever thought possible." "And you?" "I never expected this," he admitted. "Any of it. When I rode into town that day, I was just looking for the next job, the next place to rest briefly before moving on." He gazed out at the homestead, their home now filled with light and laughter. "I never thought I'd find a place to belong." "Everyone belongs somewhere, Hayden. Some just take longer to find their place than others." From inside came the sound of Henry's laughter, mingled with the deeper chuckle of Frank Roberts. The boy had been ecstatic about the wedding, proudly telling anyone who would listen that he had a papa now. "I need to give you something," Hayden said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He withdrew a small box and handed it to Violet. Inside was a delicate silver locket, engraved with intertwining vines. "It was my mother's," he explained as Violet opened it. "The only thing of hers I kept. All these years." Inside the locket was a tiny daguerreotype of a handsome young couple, Hayden's parents on their wedding day. On the opposite side, Hayden had added a small photograph of himself, Violet, and Henry, taken in town a week earlier. "Oh, Hayden," Violet breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "It's beautiful. Perfect. I thought, well, family should be together." He helped her fasten the locket around her neck. "Past and present. And future," she added, touching the pendant reverently. "Our future." They rejoined the celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. As the evening wore on, Sheriff Lancaster cornered Hayden by the punch bowl. "Told you there was still a good man in there," the sheriff said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just needed the right person to bring him out." Hayden smiled, watching Violet dance with Henry, their copper heads gleaming in the lamplight. You were right. Don't expect me to make a habit of admitting that, though. Lancaster laughed. Fair enough? His expression grew more serious. You know, I've been thinking of retiring, getting too old for chasing outlaws and breaking up saloon fights. You're not that old, Hayden protested. Old enough to know when it's time to pass the torch. The sheriff fixed him with a meaningful look. Town's going to need a new sheriff, someone respected, someone who knows the difference between justice and vengeance. Hayden stared at him, taken aback. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Think about it, Lockwood. You've got the skills, the reputation, and now you've got roots here. A stake in the community's future. I'm a gunfighter, not a lawman. You were a gunfighter, Lancaster corrected. Now you're a husband, soon to be a father to that boy. Things change. People change. He drained his punch cup. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Before Hayden could respond, Violet approached, her cheeks flushed from dancing. What are you two conspiring about over here? Just discussing the future, madam, Lancaster replied with a wink. I'll leave you two alone. Gotta make sure those Johnson boys don't spike the punch again. As the sheriff moved away, Violet raised an eyebrow at Hayden. The future? He's thinking of retiring, Hayden explained. Suggested I might consider becoming the new sheriff. Oh? Violet's expression was carefully neutral. And what do you think about that? Hayden considered the question seriously. A year ago, even 6 months ago, the idea would have been laughable. Him, a sheriff, enforcing the very laws he'd skirted for years? Yet now the proposition didn't seem so absurd. He had changed. Or perhaps more accurately, he had remembered who he truly was beneath the layers of pain and disillusionment. The young man who'd gone to war believing in justice and honor had never completely vanished. He'd just been buried, waiting to be uncovered. I think, he said slowly, that I might be good at it, using what I know about men's darker impulses to protect rather than harm. He searched Violet's face. What do you think? Could you be a sheriff's wife? Her smile was warm and encouraging. I think you would make an excellent sheriff, Hayden Lockwood. You understand people both their capacity for evil and their potential for good, and you've walked both paths yourself. It would mean being in town more, he cautioned. Time away from the homestead, from you and Henry. We would manage, and it would be for a good cause. She took his hand. But whatever you decide, I'll support you. Your past doesn't have to dictate your future, Hayden. You've proven that already. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds and Henry alone in their home. The boy had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the day's excitement. As Hayden carried him to his bedroom, Henry stirred sleepily. Papa, he murmured, the words still new on his lips but feeling increasingly natural. I'm here, son, Hayden replied softly, his heart swelling at the simple address. Are you and Mama gonna have a baby now? Johnny Wilson says that's what happens when people get married. Hayden nearly stumbled in surprise. Well, that's something for your mother and I to discuss, Henry. I want a brother, the boy continued drowsily. Or maybe a sister, but a brother would be better for playing cowboys. We'll see what we can do, Hayden promised, tucking the blankets around the sleepy child. Now, get some sleep. It's Christmas tomorrow. Henry's eyes drifted closed. Best Christmas ever, he mumbled, before sleep claimed him completely. Hayden stood watching him for a moment, marveling at how completely this child had captured his heart. Then he felt Violet's presence behind him, her arms encircling his waist. He's right, you know, she whispered. It is the best Christmas ever. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Hayden held Violet close, still scarcely believing that this woman, this strong, beautiful, compassionate woman, was now his wife. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek, memorizing every detail. Henry asked if we're going to have a baby, he told her, amusement in his voice. Apparently, Johnny Wilson has been educating him on what happens after weddings. Violet laughed softly. That boy is too curious for his own good. She hesitated, then added, Would you want that? More children? The question stirred something deep within Hayden, a longing he hadn't acknowledged even to himself. Yes, he answered honestly. I would. A chance to be there from the beginning. To do things right. You're already doing things right with Henry, Violet assured him. But yes, I'd like more children too. A brother or sister for Henry, a family. We already are a family, Hayden reminded her, kissing her gently. Everything else is just expansion. Violet's laugh was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Expansion. Is that what we're calling it? Well, we are homesteaders, he teased, always looking to build, to grow. Their laughter faded into tender kisses, and soon words became unnecessary as they expressed their love in the most ancient and sacred way. Much later, as Violet slept peacefully beside him, Hayden lay awake, contemplating the path that had led him here. From the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg to this quiet bedroom in Arizona territory, from a man consumed by bitterness to one overflowing with gratitude, from Stoneheart to husband, father, and perhaps, someday soon, sheriff. The transformation seemed impossible, yet here he was, living proof that no heart was beyond redemption, that even the most damaged soul could find healing in the right hands. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white, a clean slate, a new beginning, just like the one he'd been given. Hayden Lockwood closed his eyes, not in resignation as he once had, but in peaceful anticipation of the morning to come, Christmas morning, with his new family, the first of many. And as he drifted toward sleep, the last thought that crossed his mind was how utterly wrong those men had been, the ones who claimed his heart was dead. It wasn't dead. It had merely been dormant, waiting for the right moment, the right woman, to water it back to bloom. Spring came early to the Arizona territory that year, bringing with it new beginnings in more ways than one. The Lockwood homestead flourished under the combined efforts of Hayden, Violet, and Frank Roberts. New fields were plowed, the irrigation system James had dreamed of became reality, and a small orchard was planted on the sunny slope Violet had once pointed out. Henry took to school with enthusiasm, proudly telling his classmates about his papa, who was now the town sheriff. For Hayden had indeed accepted Lancaster's offer, though he arranged his duties to allow him ample time at the homestead. The townsfolk, initially wary of having the notorious Stoneheart enforcing their laws, soon discovered that Hayden's reputation was actually an asset. Word spread quickly through the territory that Cedar Ridge was not a town where troublemakers were welcome, and incidents of serious crime dropped noticeably. But the most significant new beginning came on a warm May morning when Violet gave birth to a daughter, Rose Elizabeth Lockwood, a tiny, perfect baby, with a dusting of copper hair like her mother and brother, but with eyes that promised to be as blue as her father's. Hayden held his newborn daughter with a mixture of awe and terror, her tiny form so fragile in his weathered hands. After Henry's birth was long past by the time Hayden entered their lives, this was his first experience with an infant, and it humbled him in ways he couldn't have imagined. "She's so small," he whispered to Violet, who watched from the bed, tired but radiant. "How can something so small already own my entire heart?" "That's the miracle of it," Violet replied softly. "How our hearts expand to make room for each new love." Henry peered at his sister with cautious curiosity. "She's red and wrinkly," he observed, "and she doesn't do much." Hayden laughed. "She'll do more as she grows, and you'll be the big brother who teaches her everything she needs to know." The boy straightened at this, suddenly serious about his new responsibility. "I'll take good care of her, Papa. I promise." "I know you will, son." Hayden ruffled his hair affectionately. "You're a Lockwood, and Lockwoods keep their promises." The family settling, the new sheriff position, the birth of Rose all might have seemed like endings to the story that began when a hardened gunfighter took a job protecting a determined widow. But, as Hayden knew now, endings were often just disguised beginnings. One evening in late summer, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, Henry asked a question that had clearly been on his mind for some time. "Papa, Johnny Wilson says you used to be a famous gunfighter, that men called you Stoneheart because you didn't feel anything when you killed bad men. Is that true?" Violet started to intervene, but Hayden stopped her with a gentle touch. This was a question he needed to answer himself. "Some of that is true, Henry," he said carefully. "I was a gunfighter, and some men did call me that name, but they were wrong about the important part." "Which part?" "About not feeling anything." Hayden chose his words thoughtfully, aware that this conversation might shape his son's understanding of violence and redemption. I felt too much, actually, so much that it hurt, so I pretended not to feel anything at all. I built walls around my heart to protect it. Henry considered this, like the fort we built with the blocks to keep the toy soldiers safe. Very much like that. Hayden smiled at the apt comparison. But the problem with walls is that, while they keep bad things out, they also keep good things out, like love and friendship and joy. So what happened? Henry asked, engrossed in the story. How did you knock down the walls? Hayden's eyes met Violet's over the sleeping form of baby Rose in her arms. I met your mother, he said simply, and you, and I realized that some things are worth the risk of being hurt, that a life without love isn't really living at all. Henry nodded, processing this wisdom with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. I'm glad you decided to feel things again, Papa. So am I, son. Hayden wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders. So am I. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Hayden Lockwood surveyed his domain, not with the cold calculation of a gunfighter assessing terrain, but with the grateful heart of a man who had found his place in the world. The homestead sprawled before him, no longer just Violet's promise to a dead man, but their shared vision for the future. The cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The fields were lush with crops. The orchard, though still young, showed promise of future harvests. But more important than these physical manifestations of their success were the intangible ones, the love that filled their home, the respect he'd earned in the community, not through fear, but through fairness. The knowledge that his children would grow up understanding the value of both strength and compassion. What are you thinking about? Violet asked, noting his contemplative expression. About how lucky I am, he replied honestly. About how different my life would be if Lancaster hadn't convinced me to take that job protecting a stubborn widow and her son. Violet smiled, shifting Rose in her arms. I prefer to think of it as fate rather than luck. We were meant to find each other, Hayden, to heal each other. Maybe so. He took her free hand in his, marveling still at how perfectly it fit within his own. Whatever brought us together, I'm grateful for it. More grateful than I have words to express. As night fell over the homestead, bringing with it a blanket of stars and the chorus of crickets, the Lockwood family remained on the porch, savoring the peace they had fought so hard to secure. Henry eventually dozed off against his father's shoulder, and Rose slept contentedly in her mother's arms. In that moment of perfect tranquility, Hayden reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the desolation of war to the healing power of love. From a man who believed his heart was dead to one whose heart beat strong and true for his family, men had claimed the cowboy's heart was dead, but a woman's tears had watered it back to bloom. And in that blooming, Hayden Lockwood had found not just redemption, but a happiness beyond anything he could have imagined. It was, he decided as he gazed at his sleeping children and beautiful wife, a happy ending worth fighting for. And more importantly, a beginning worth living for.